Morning. Welcome to Design 2. We're going to start off with innovative design approaches in the data analytics and learning MOOC. And we have Justin here to talk to us about it.
Hi, yes, I'm Justin Dellinger from the University of Texas at Arlington. Matt Crossland is our lead presenter today, but unfortunately he couldn't make it. We're from the University of Texas at Arlington, the Learning Innovation and Network Knowledge Research Lab, under the tutelage of the esteemed George Siemens over here. And thank you for the plug yesterday, George. Appreciate that. So primarily, I will talk about the DAL MOOC today and kind of what we have looked at so far in terms of design sided, and then where we're going to move in the future with our research. So has anybody taken the DAL MOOC in here? Ryan Baker, well, if you're one of the teachers, you probably should have. Anybody else? I was wondering. Shane, okay. So DAL MOOC is Data Analytics and Learning MOOC. It was offered from October until December of last year. So what we're looking at right now is our visual syllabus for the page and links to everything. So when you're looking at this is the common place that you'd go before you move into the different areas. So number one, we have our overview, tools, calendar, weekly competencies, timeline for assignments, policies, code of conduct, and things of that nature. Some feedback that we received just on this page at the beginning is that there were some issues with navigation. People didn't know where to start. For me, sometimes I think that's a little bit problematic when you have the numbers. So I think that's one thing that we're going to, we'll look at in the future of maybe we're going to have a better, solid place to start. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. We're calling it the glue or the neutral zone. So mostly this received a favorable reception. So the big thing that we did with DAL MOOC was something called the dual layer MOOC design. So we used the course metaphor, which was taken from the Matrix, or the red pill versus the blue pill. So the red pill was our more connectivist layer, and then we had the blue pill, which was more instructivist. So one thing that we wanted to do is make something that's a little bit authentically different here. And with this MOOC, some people have claimed to have both options in their course before, but their social tools tend to be used in very instructivist ways. So we're trying to find ways that they can navigate back and forth through both ways in the course. So with this, the most important thing is with this design, each layer is equally valid. And the participants really get a choice of their learning and where they want to go with it. And they have fluid movement that goes in between it, or they should. So this is maybe a little small with a little bit of lights, but if you... Can you turn these off? Yeah, that's what I was kind of wondering. I don't know which... Well, I will say that I did tweet out the slides. I used the Learning with MOOCs hashtag. So you have access to these slides. Helps a little bit. Everything but. There we go. Yay. This thing off. I'm still going to have to talk into this for the recording. So, okay, so this is the theoretical flow for our learners through this course. So basically the students would come in and through the orientation part of it, they determine what path that they want to go to, whether the connectivist or the instructivist side. So the instructivist side is going to have modules that are just very heavily instructor-centered and focused. And then connectivist side really is going to focus on the group work. And it's definitely student-centered where they're collaborating to achieve their competencies through problem-based learning. But with this design, the students have the ability to go back and forth between the two. And I'll expand more upon this a little bit later. And by the end, as they're moving through the course, they could be able to touch on both sides, or they could pick one path or the other. So for the DAL MOOC in particular, the two pathways that we have kind of starts with a weekly email that sets up, and then there should be a daily email update that went out throughout the course. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But on the connectivist side, we use ProSolo as our main platform. So in there, set the groups, set the goals, they form their groups, and use it as a collaborative workspace. They had an assignment bank where you could go and address the competencies in the way this fit, and then this had blogs, social media were a big part of this as well. On the Instructive SI, we had edX as our main platform. So Carolyn Rose helped with Quick Helper and Bazaar, which is a way for students to get help timely when they needed it, and ways to work collaboratively to solve problems inside the Instructive SI. So again, they could go back and forth between these two and then repeat as needed, as much as they needed to be able to get the materials and achieve their competencies. So one major design consideration was the integration of all these new tools. We had 4 throughout the course. So we had Tableau, Gephi, RapidMiner, and Lightside. So each of the instructors piloted the tool in their course. So the first week was George Siemens. We had Ryan Baker, Carolyn Rose, and Dragan Jasevich were the 4 instructors. So lots of new tools. Some feedback on that is their students did have some anxiety, and trying to use all these different tools and learn them and keep up to speed as the course is moving along. So some of the feedback that we received was that it was just a little bit too much. And some additional design considerations from the beginning is the fact that we had a large international component in the course. So in terms of demographics, there were over 20,000 people in it, with 6,000 self-assessing. And with that, out of the US, we had about 25%, India about 18%, UK 4%, and then Canada, Australia, Spain, Brazil, a little under 3% each. So there's some considerations with that. As well as thinking about the number of students. So we had 6,500 describe themselves as bachelors, 6,500 masters, about 1,000 PhD, and then 6,000 that were out of this. So we had some people that were saying that they were in primary school. I'm assuming that they didn't know what they were doing or they were playing a funny joke. But yes. So we had the whole spectrum. So additionally, with all of the integration, all these new tools, as well as this framework, the dual layer framework, we definitely needed to have good scaffolding in place to make sure that the students could be able to move effectively from one place to another and have the support that they needed to do so. And then the final thing was course safety. This is definitely an open course. We use Twitter's, blogs, as well as edX forums. So make sure to have things like code of conduct and things like that in place to help students have a place of safety in the course. So some of our lessons learned initially, that the quality expectations are very high. With an open free course like this, a little bit surprising, students expected high quality videos in particular. That was the biggest feedback that we got. So just simple face-to-face using YouTube, some people did not like that as much. Understanding staff limitations as well, because MOOCs are very time consuming. So you need to probably have a dedicated designer if you don't have one, if you're going to try to attempt something of this magnitude. You also need to clearly articulate your structure. Even though Matt did a really good job on putting it together, there was still a lot of confusion about where to go and what you could do in the course. And then again, scaffolding is very key to support students' success. And then another thing is, it's be a good recommendation if you can get as much of it done as you can and not go along the way. How many people have had that? So moving forward, there are some things that we are really looking at in the second offering of the course, which should hopefully take place in spring, hopefully. So with that would be improvements to the profiling system. And with that, we can get a better job at getting us student data. And one thing that Matt and I are doing is starting to go through it right now with Srečko Jaksimovic and Vidomir Kovanovic out of the University of Edinburgh right now. We're really trying to get at the data and seeing where students are going in the course, and better profiling data would probably help us out a little bit in kind of determining some of these things. Also for Carolyn Rose's side, where you have the student matching, and maybe better to help facilitate better matches when they're trying to collaboratively work on assignments. So another thing is just sort of better group tools, looking at things such as BuddyPress to try to improve this collaboration in the course overall. So moving forward with the X and C MOOC part of it, one thing that we're trying to do in this side is including more pedagogy. Instead of learning about how to learn about analytics, learning analytics, as opposed to just learning analytics in general. And then also just kind of improving the assignments as well as reducing the number of competencies. Having too many competencies inside the course proved a little bit stressful. We got a lot of feedback about that. So maybe having one particular one with maybe a couple subs where students or learners can have the opportunity to have an artifact where they can fit at the end too, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Also on the connectivist side, maybe just having a little bit more guidance with the assignment banks. Participants had a little bit of a trouble negotiating that and had some questions about that. So maybe providing some examples or some ways where they could feel like a little bit more comfortable, kind of encouraging them to pursue that option. Also improving the group connectivity and also, again, like I said, trying to give them an artifact that they can have. So one thing that Matt's been really working towards is trying to identify what would be the solid glue, because we had edX and we had ProSolo, and between both of those students had to move to a number of different places, especially with the social media component. So one thing that we're really trying to get at is Matt and I are very interested in like blurring and making things purple. So instead of having the red pill and the blue pill, that you really have this purple pill where you can move back and forth seamlessly. I'm going to again discuss that at the end. So with this glue in this neutral zone, the biggest thing that we are trying to get at is to have a single place where students can go, and that requires a programmer to be able to really get at the back end of the information. So that's one thing that we're looking at on the next run of the course. Because the structure for the course, we were supposed to have those weekly emails. Well, those didn't happen. Or the weekly emails did happen, but not those daily emails to help provide scaffolding and guidance throughout the course. So that wasn't the best option. So we were trying to find better ways to support the learners where they're at. So having a centralized website with a single sign-on to try to minimize confusion would probably be the best thing to do. And also have more social media integration on the page itself. So instead of just linking out to everything, maybe we can embed some more things inside the course. So another thing that we're really going to try to do is encourage those choices, really try to get at that purple side of things, and really try to help them learn, figure out what their learner preferences are. Because that's something that we're trying to get at and link a little bit more to, trying to understand people and where they're at, and not just trying to sort of humanize technology, as George was talking about yesterday. So anyway, so that may be taking us possibly out of ProSolo or edX. Some of these things are still being discussed right now. But again, we want to allow students to kind of learn what their preferences are and figure out how they can best get through content. So for some of our future research, Matt and I and Srishka and Vita have come up with a term customizable modalities. So with this, sort of at the beginning, we designed more in like a linear idea at first, but begin to kind of see the messiness as you go through the course. So and students kind of see it this way too. We noticed at the beginning they didn't quite dabble as much, but experimentation happens as you become more comfortable. So we also see that as designers as well. So you may see the tooth paths, but then it really may be a lot messier than you think. But then beyond this, you have your mixed pathways. So I prefer the term multiple pathways as of dual layer. Dual layer sort of, this idea that maybe one thing is better than another when you have layers, but they have multiple pathways through the course. So with this, you could start on the instructivist side, move into the connectivist side to complete your competency. So that's following, again, a linear path, even if it's kind of all over the place. But on another side of things, with this last diagram here, you may be able to just touch at certain parts. You may not have to follow a linear path through it. You may just pick a piece here, another piece here, another piece here, as you're moving forward to complete your competency at the end. So we're really trying to make sure we have the pieces in place for that to happen. And again, with that, you have to have a fluid framework, and you have to have seamless integration. If you don't have those things, it's not going to be possible. So for some of our future research, right now Matt and I are really getting into the data as much as we can here. We have some limitations with it, but we do have a vast amount that we're able to get at. So we have Srishka and Vida, as I said, at the University of Edinburgh, who are looking at the quantitative side, and then we're looking at the qualitative a little bit more. And we're trying to determine why students are picking the paths that they're picking and why they're doing things at a certain point in the course when they are. So we're doing semi-structured interviews right now, and we're actually going to present at Digital Learning Research Network Conference in 2 weeks in San Francisco. And I'm one of the conference organizers. I'll plug this and say we have about 20 spots left. So if you want to sign up for this, better get in. But anyway, so we were presenting on this there, some of our findings as we're kind of wrapping that part up. And then additionally, another thing that we're kind of experimenting with is I also teach large survey history courses at the University of Texas at Arlington. And when you have 200 to 400 students in an online environment, trying to look at some lessons that you can learn from using this kind of MOOC framework in your traditional online classes. So I've been attempting to do some things such as the assignment banks, such as multiple pathways in the course. That's also in Blackboard. So Blackboard is an LMS, can be quite limiting at times. So trying to find ways while using a mandated learning management system to be able to get at students to provide them as many choices as possible and allow them to well, the biggest thing I'm trying to do is assignment banks. That's my biggest one. But also trying to find ways to connect them beyond your traditional discussion forums, move them outside the class, have more use of social media and things like that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that at DLearn as well. And then if you have any more questions about some of this information, Matt runs a blog called EduGeek Journal. If you Google that. That's a pretty, he expounds more upon the information that I have here. He was the instructional designer for the MOOC, so he's thought about this a lot and has a lot more information about it, and he'd be happy to talk with you. So at this point, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Otherwise, thank you.
Great, thanks, Justin. While we take some questions, Eric, maybe you can come up and set up your presentation. If you have a question, I'll bring the mic to you.
So, Mike, you were saying that instead of using discussion boards, you are thinking of using more social media as a substitution. Could you explain a little bit the thoughts behind it?
So at times I've seen a lot of the students that I teach are non-traditional students that are part of an online nursing program, so they're RNs trying to get their BSNs. And I've seen that they kind of fall into this very pattern of I want to get done as quickly as possible and not engage with the content so much. So, and they've also had high incidences of people copying and pasting material. I've determined I've been able to see that pretty easily in my course, where they'll get together and they'll write the same thing over and over. So I'm trying to find ways in social media maybe to kind of get them past that a little bit more. It's not necessarily about preventing cheating, per se like that, but it's just kind of ways to engage them at different levels too. Also, discussion board, I have found the tool to be a little bit limiting inside of Blackboard, so it's just a way for them to kind of pull some other things in a medium that they're a little bit more comfortable with. I mean, no 16-year-old is using Facebook anymore, but us 30, 40-year-olds tend to be on it a lot more right now. So I think it was a bit more of a comfortable medium for the learners to do that. They have not had the same sort of success with Twitter. I've tried to use the Twitter hashtag and try to get people to be involved in that. I've had people look at it, but not really do much with it. So, but Facebook, I've had them come in, for one example, I had them create memes. So they had to go, just sort of extra credit time, they could go out, they could find a historical image, maybe like a painting, in this case, talk about it, and they had to get all the citation information, so they're practicing all those skills. But at the end, I had them make it kind of funny, because the internet's memes. You see it's cats and memes half the time. So, a way for them to do it, and some of them are hysterical. I wish I had a good example for you, I can show you later. But there's some really great ones because I teach the first half of American history, so I've had some pretty interesting ones. So anyway, hope that gets at it. Anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Okay, our next presentation is with Eric Hemberg, and it's called Developing a Blended Learning Course for Chinese Computer Science Students.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Eric, and this is work with Uname O'Reilly. We're from the Alpha Group at MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. And I'm a computer scientist, and we got asked, the motivation for this course was that we got asked to create a blended course for computer science undergraduates at the third year at Shantou University. And the first question is, where's Shantou? That's why I have this map up here, because China is very big and it has a lot of people. Here is Shantou and here's Hong Kong. And it's a small city of around 5 million people. And the university is one of the mid-tier universities. So really this talk is very much helping you, when you get the question, you can develop a course for university. How do you do that and what do you learn? And really, there was plenty of motivations for doing it. So one of the key ones was that the teaching method there is often by rote. So they're very, very good, the students, they're very intelligent, but it's hard to communicate often because our Mandarin is really, really poor, so we speak English. I'm not an English native speaker, but I've forgotten, because it was such a long time since I learned English, how hard it is when you teach in a different language that you don't master. Then, so they often learn by rote, but so we needed to figure out how can we improve that, because then they're kind of passive in the classroom as well. They're used to sitting down like you're doing, and if you're slightly restless, that can be very, very tiresome. I always pick a seat close to the window. That's my key to doing that. Then a lot of taking tests, very good at taking tests, but in one way, does this really stimulate problem solving? So what we got asked was to say, could we improve the teaching and the learning for these students, as in a way helping the new university to bring in new methodologies and have the students experience this? That was really the second part of our brief compared to just teaching things within the subject. We loved it. It's perfect because we get to think about what do we want to teach and what is new. Even better is that I come from Sweden, so I never learned any methodologies until people started telling me that I was taught problem-based learning, but they don't tell you that in school, but you realize that afterwards. So it's so you kind of pick things that you want, how you want to teach it. So really, see, can we get them to acquire a deeper understanding, make the students empowered to think boldly, as in question things, and think outside the box in a sense, their teachers' expectations. So that becomes very much of a cultural exercise again, because we're foreigners coming into China, and that becomes culturally very hard. So teach them to learn to solve problems instead of all this rote learning. And finally, as I said, expose new methods of learning, in a sense, just giving them, this is my fantastic term, a smorgasbord, because that is of different learning styles. So then, in a sense, they're exposed to them, and they would be able to see if anyone fits to them. So really, why we're here at Learning with MOOCs is, in a sense, we wanted to see, so we need to do this personal and active education, but how do we scale it? Because that's the problem. You can do active in the classroom, but how do we scale it? So that is kind of what we're building up for, how we started doing things in the classroom to learn this new culture, and then what do we think about how to scale it? Because we were thinking that this should, it should be possible to do not just in only one classroom. So we scale the duration of the course as we go along. We scale the size of the class. We're still not up at massive anyway, but we need to start thinking somewhere. So we start small and then we expand it. So, and here's almost where we do, it's kind of funny, I thought about it this time, because we kind of think of doing active learning, and we do it in the classroom. And then we try to break down our problems, which are computer science algorithms sometimes, and do them actively, and then we move them back into the computer. I found as a thought experiment very interesting. How can I take a concept, make it active, and then put it back into the computer? And finally, we kind of, as I said, we want to go from the Spark to the MOOC. So the agenda here is that first we have the content from our course we called EPS 101, and then we have the experience from the course. So it's pretty straightforward. And here I kind of here I'll just go the overview of our course design. So step one, it took us a year. So we designed the course with personal active interaction between teachers and peers. So in a sense, I'd end up saying the first step was for us to have a cultural exchange between students, staff, and teachers, because we've never been to Shantou before. So as I said, what happens when you get put down somewhere else, trying to learn the institution, trying to learn the culture, and how you can teach in there. That's what we needed to do the first year. So we spent 1 week there doing that. Second year, we decided, okay, now let's try expanding. So easiest way to do it is to blend it and put in an online part, because then we can expand the duration of the course, and then we add a project week at the end, so we can kind of tie it up. And here's the description. It's a very tasty sandwich course. You have the online class part, online class part. So what we did there is, again, trying to keep the course personal, and active. That's really the tricky part where we found out, because we hadn't taught any online courses before. So we learned a lot of that, and we verified a lot of the literature. So final part is that we refined it from what we learned here. And as I said, one of the key things, you add the weekly online meeting to stop losing your students in the middle of the course. And what we want to do, the last part was we transfer the course to the STU teachers, because students flow through, so they learn something, but it doesn't stay at the institution. So the second part is to get it to stay with the teachers at the institution. And here comes the inner teacher. I kind of have to show what the course was about, and I'm hoping like 2 minutes you'll be able to learn about evolutionary processes and systems. So basically, I always hope that it should be possible. So basically, we're doing an abstract view of evolution as an adaptive process of improvement. So here's just a breakdown of an algorithm of it. I won't go through it. And then, so we have population-based selection, and you have replication with variation. We see that in biology. What other systems can we translate that into? So we try to recognize that in other non-biological systems, and identify how that can lead to adaptation and intelligent system, because that's the argument with biology, that is led to some kind of intelligence. So we connect that to computation, and we say, well, if we put it into computation, we can slide into artificial intelligence. We slide into this name called genetic algorithms. So that's what this one describes. It's kind of an algorithm based on genetic replication. And we have to go into games in one way. So we can try to evolve software-based strategies for a game called Tron. And it's also called Snake, and you all played it on your Nokia phones when you were younger. And then we also enjoy the distributed AI. So we try to put in our computer science, AI, and ALSA. And while doing this, here's where we put in the skill components. So we kind of try to blend out the perspective and then skill components. So what do we do? The pilot, the first year. We spent a week in China. I ate a lot. Very good. But that was not the point why I'm here. I'm saying, so we did class games. And we did, one of my favorite ones is the prisoner's dilemma. I won't explain it, but basically, yeah, I won't explain. So we did that in class, and it's just instinct. But the point is that we set up payoffs for the prisoners as a fitness, and then we use it as a round of evolutionary selection and reproduction, and we do it in the class. I kind of like it. I really like to do algorithms with people and then show it on the board afterwards. And now we have to think again, as I said, we've taken an algorithm from the computer, we put it in the classroom. How do we put it back into the computer to scale massively and explain it? Second part was think, pair, share. So again, this is a debate between me and Uname. What examples are good? Of course, computer scientists, I put pick up Linux innovation as a good way of showing how operating systems can evolve as one example. Some people might not think that is the best example. But the students see it as an example, think of the examples, pair and share. And here we come into a language part that they are really able to understand the things, but communicating is very hard, so you can get the discussions to be quite stuttering. And then finally, our active learning, another active learning part. This was, as Uname describes, as a hoot. So we called it a sexual selection via mating game. Again, we wander around and give people a way of understanding the effects of sexual characteristics on mate selection and offspring. One way just to show the difference between kind of how much you miss from putting evolution in a computer compared to what it actually looks in nature, but also seeing the finer parts of fitness. So that's what we did the first year. We did it in the classroom, and this was the pieces that we kept. We had some that bombed out, so we didn't use them the next time. So next year, some nice diagrams, because we're going online, so we can see some client-server architecture. Because we wanted just to put in more computer science, software engineering. So we doubled the class from 20 to 40, and we increased it to 11 weeks. And we start installing OpenEdX and do 9 weeks online on it. And basically, we put in our final week where we give them projects to round off and see what they learned. And that's when we go back to China. And the OpenEdX platform was, we basically, again, we hadn't used it before, so we kind of used it in the way that everyone's saying that we shouldn't use it. We put in videos on it, and we noticed that from student participation that the videos and multiple choice question wasn't the best way to keep their attention. But the final projects we used just to refine. Again, we come into the blended part, so at least we could pick up some of the parts when we blend it back with our second slice of bread on the sandwich. So we developed new user experience from the code they have, documentation, algorithm capability. But here we had to be very careful, given that we lost so many online, we had to really change in our final projects. So that's the adaptive nature. So, yeah, and scalable by, so we say this is possible to scale by size if you stagger it. We haven't really tried it yet. So final part, now we can consolidate. Now we tried some online learning, what did we learn and can we put it in? Well, we needed to design prototype software now to see, can we supplement what we do in the classroom and how does it work? And you really need good graphic designers because this doesn't really blow the students away. But we introduced those as supplemental classroom exercises and see how they worked when we tried with the students, and we're working on developing them more. And we get the students, this is always great, you can get them to improve them as class projects and do sure work a lot better. And then back to that was a prisoner's dilemma activity. And what the key thing we did was to do more online teacher-student interaction, so we didn't lose them online. And then we improved the GA explanation that we did. So here's what happens when you get students to do things. They can put in visualizations and animations, so that helps as well, and more distributed AI. And then, again, because it comes back, so we refactored a lot of our code base just to improve the learner experience in order to get it to work better. So this is what happens when you let the students do some things, and it looks this nice when they GUI. And so the experience is now, I would describe the course, so you'll recognize many things. So they'd never done online learning before, so it was a very, very big contrast because we had them giving weekly essays, or sorry, not essays, the wrong word, weekly diaries. And again, it's very easy for us to think of a diary, but then again, when you do it's second language, it takes a long time to formulate yourself. So in order to get them to do it well, we had to even put it into the time and not have it as a separate exercise. But we show that the lack of discipline overshadowed the flexibility of online content. It was very hard when you sit at campus to figure out how well you can deal with the asynchronous nature of online learning. Forum really, really failing miserably, that they didn't use them at all. They use private chat, so in China you use QQ chat. So that was what they were doing all the time. They were setting up, talking on their groups. There was nothing. We spent 1 year just asking our TAs, what are the students doing? And they say, they're on QQ, they're on QQ. And there was a discussion, do we have to have the discussion so we can see them? And then we said no. And main point was that TSA that it was very much the fear of revealing weaknesses to the teachers. They didn't want to put up anything they did not know. They were very so that comes to the heart of the problem, is to say we gave them open-ended questions and wanted them to be bold, but that was really, really hard thing to get through. And working in team projects, yeah, so then we can have them reflect on the project, and we could also highlight, we come back to this scoping open-ended problem. So that's why we need to be in the classroom the last week when we saw that. And I'm very interested in what I've heard all about this team-based learning, doing it online, because yeah, that is very good experiences that we hadn't solved yet. So that's why we went back there, but we were happy with the outcome that we got. And student self-organization was that we come back to the way they were used to acting. So it was very much that they didn't self-organize. They was very much being ordered from a centralized authority, as in us. So we couldn't expect them to set up their own groups very well. What we did in our in-classroom meetings, we saw that improved online activity just by looking at submissions we got in and just checking our logs from OpenEdX platform. And the other thing that we can use that for our data-driven decision making for when we decide to have them hand in assessments, so to get it when they're actually working or not. And then the key point here is kind of bad tradesmen blame their tools. So I'm not blaming them, but I'm highlighting the IT tools when you develop IT in Boston and you try to deploy it at not a great network somewhere in China, that then you need to think slightly forward and realizing which tools are available behind the firewall in China. How do you need to solve that when everything is Chinese? So you really need to think about that practical step of deployment there. So we asked them the question, would you recommend the course to a friend? We asked them a lot of other questions, but this one was the one we find the most interesting. So we had 20 students in 2013, and 95% said yes. And 2014, we had 42, so 97% said yes. And 2015, we had 94% saying yes. So they kind of liked the experience a lot, but so it was much of the experience we did, much of the experience they did enjoy, so they would come back and do it. So when we wrap it up, we say the second part, which is the hard one, is now the SDU CS department is committed to take the turn and turn it into Chinese, so we'll have to see how that goes. And as I said, to sustain the course, you need to not only have the students passing through, but seeing if the teachers can take up the new teaching methods. So again, we come up to the teaching part, but we were focused here on teaching students for the scalability. Yeah, scaling the course further with the volume of the content, duration of the course, and size of the class. And as I said, really what we're working with is expand active classroom to be active online. That's really what we're working for our development. And finally, the acknowledgements. We have the Li Keqing Foundation that sponsored us. We have the Friends of Shantou University, Yingling and Anthony Fung, and all the staff and students that we see over here. And we have the Europe's that I had working with it. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. So if we have any questions for Eric, and we're going to have Stian set up his presentation while taking questions for Eric.
Just a very quick question. The QQ chat, you couldn't mine those logs at all, or was it an ethical issue?
No, well, I think it was, we never tried mining them because we thought, in a sense, saying like, yeah, we don't need to have all the discussion that students are doing, in a sense. They need, like, if they knew we were mining, yeah, we would have needed to ask QQ in order to get the logs and everything like that. And then also was the point of saying, yeah, do we need, students should be able to have private information in order to learn. So that's the point. We weren't really sure what we wanted to get out of them. And we had the TAs in the practical way, so we haven't really gone out for looking at that information yet. But it was, yeah. So basically, the thought never occurred to us to mine the QQ log. So we should have heard that before, and we could have tried.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Our next presentation is Design Considerations for a Teacher Professional Development MOOC by Stian.
Hi everyone, and very happy to be here. Our presentations actually are a great follow-up from the two presentations previously. You'll see a bunch of different connection points, I think. The first presentation, there are two presentations about this particular course from different angles. The first one was supposed to be given by Hedia Najafi, and she designed the slides. Unfortunately, she fell sick and she couldn't be here. So I will present to her slides, and then I will give my presentations afterwards. You can stop me at any time with questions, or we'll have hopefully time to discuss at the end. So we're going to talk about a MOOC that ran on edX this summer called Inc. 101X, Teaching with Technology and Inquiry. And it was a MOOC designed for in-service teachers to support them as professional development in how to use technology to support changing their pedagogical practices. The goal was really K through 12 teachers. That was very strongly suggested in all of our promotional material. We did get also quite a few higher education teachers and also some museum and of course some general audience. But it was actually, from our surveys, it was surprisingly focused around those professional groups, which meant that we got a wealth of experienced people into our MOOC, and that's one of the things that we really wanted to take advantage of. You know, for teachers, and we come from the Ontario Institute for Studies and Education in Toronto, but I'm sure these issues apply to North America as well. Once you leave Teachers College and you are in practice, there are some professional development opportunities. They tend to be sometimes practice-oriented. It's difficult to do them well online. There's certainly limited time for doing them, as well as, of course, teachers being very busy during the school year. And a lot of the courses tend to be quite discipline specific. So what we were seeing was an opportunity for a MOOC that was using new practices that was run during the summer, where we were hoping that the teachers would have a bit more time, and that went across disciplines, but we still used the teachers' disciplines for grouping, which you'll see soon. So the idea was, this was actually came about as an opportunity to collaborate with the University of Toronto Schools, which is a lab high school affiliated with the university and that has been doing a lot of innovative practices. So we were able to have people from our university who've been researching pedagogy and technology for many years, you know, collaborate with the headmaster and the teachers at this high school who have the in-class experience. And because it's a lab school, we're actually able to get permission from the teachers to use live video, well, not live, but authentic video from classroom situations, which is typically difficult for privacy reasons. This comes out of a long research program of my supervisor, Jim Slaughter, who has been working on his framework called Knowledge, Community, and Inquiry. And there's a number of PhD theses and a bunch of articles published on this, most of it focused on K through 12 teaching situations. But because he teaches in higher education, he's also applied it to his own course. And this MOOC actually came out of a university course for pre-service teachers that he's been teaching for about 8 years. It started out as a seminar class of about 25 students, highly interactive, using a lot of the technologies that we were talking about, wikis, blogs, Twitter, having students research and present on technologies, and coming up with a final project, which would be a lesson design that would integrate both the ideas, the content, and the theories from the course, and of course the students' personal, teachables, disciplinary interests. 2 years ago, the curriculum was reorganized, the number of electables was shrunk, and suddenly we had, instead of 25 students, 85 students. Still on campus, still live face-to-face, but we had a challenge in how we could actually, still teach according to the values that we believed in. And at that point, I came in as part of my PhD thesis and said, let's look at how we can use technology, hybrid teaching, scripting and automation to actually not switch to a lecture mode, but keep what was really valuable about that course. And this summer, we said, okay, 25 to 85, let's go 2000. Let's go MOOC. Okay, it's not 50,000 because it's a very specialized topic, but it's still a different scale. So the KCI framework is based on scaffolded inquiry. Now, there are some theories of inquiry, and we're very inspired by, for example, Marlene Scardamelia's knowledge building. However, these are unbounded inquiry, the authentic inquiry where you really want the students to come up with the research questions and be able to follow them. And that works great in primary school, because that's exactly what you want them to do. You want them to be inspired and to learn how to think as scientists, to have constructive discussions with each other, and saying, instead of saying you're stupid, saying your theory doesn't explain what I just observed, right? That's for a third grader, that's a pretty big step. In secondary and especially high school, that breaks down because as a teacher you have curriculum goals, and you can't just step away from that. You can't just spend half a year exploring really deeply some topic, no matter how interesting that topic is. So what Jim was interested in is really how can we have this deep inquiry and collaboration, but we still guarantee the teacher that they meet their curriculum goals. So we start out with scaffolded inquiry activities, and a good example from a previous K-12 project was where you had lots of groups that were learning about different diseases. So you have the circulatory system, you have the heart, and then you get a wiki template, so with the headlines, and now you need to go out and find some information about, you're going to be an expert on this particular disease. Of course, everyone else have access to your wiki, so now the class as a unit have come up with this indexed knowledge base on diseases that map to these accessible knowledge goals that are open to the emergent themes and community voices, but also map to the content expectations. Then we want you not to be just an expert on a specific disease. We want you to understand all of these diseases and also how they interact. And that's why the second step is an inquiry project where you have, for example, case-based learning. You have someone coming into with a diagnosis, and you need to understand what disease that is by looking at the pages generated by all of your peers. And so, of course, knowing that the knowledge that you generate is going to be accessed by your peers, ideally also makes you more motivated about producing a good product. What's also interesting is, after the course, all that knowledge that is generated and curated by the students, is that just thrown away, or is that actually turned into something durable? And so in the university course on teaching with inquiry, every year we send students out to gather information about interesting products, interesting teaching approaches when it comes to smart boards, clickers, and mobile phones, writing up, that is actually something that's now a durable resource. That's the wiki that we've been working on for 8 years, and that next year the students can come in and build upon, because technology changes. Our ideas change, so it's not done, but it's also not something that's just wasted. So these were kind of the main principles of this course that I was mentioning, and we used a wiki platform for the main collaboration. And you see here, you have right away access to look at the projects, the designs that were made in previous years, right? So you come into this course, and we try to foster this sense that you're part of a knowledge community. And of course, that's also because these teacher candidates, in half a year will be out in schools. They'll be the young teachers surrounded by their seniors, and it's very important for them to understand what it means to be part of a community, and how, hopefully, whether they stay in touch with the students from our university or whether they find communities online that they can participate in, that's really the way for them to be able to take this into practice. There's a final assignment, this lesson design, which I mentioned, which is also scaffolded in terms of complexity and in terms of themes. So every week there's a new theme. And for example, in week 5, you might talk about collaboration. What's the theory of collaboration? What are some great examples? What are some technologies that can foster collaboration? And then go and look at your lesson design, which is, which you work on every week for the whole course. And how can you now enable more collaboration, right? Next week, we're talking about tangible devices. Next week, we're talking about ethics. How is your lesson design ethical? What are some of the concerns that you need to consider? Now, as we were trying to turn this into a MOOC, we had a lot of concerns. We really didn't want to, we wanted to show, not tell. So we didn't want to show people a lot of videos telling them to be interactive and that technologies can be really transformative. But we weren't really sure to what extent we could do that or what was the best way to do that. So one of the things we thought of was this idea that you put a course on the edX course listing, you sign up, it starts in a month, now what do? Nothing. You wait for a month. And we thought, what if we can take advantage of this time? So we set up we called it the lounge. It started about a month before the course started. So the course started on 1st of July, but I think it was supposed to open 1st of June. I think it was a little bit delayed. But anyway, you came into the lounge, you could do the survey, which we used for understanding who were taking our course and putting people into groups. And you could start reading about the course, you could start participating in the forums. So it's a bit of an idea of warming up to the course, so that when in the first week of the course, we kind of hit the ground running. Now, I'll talk a lot more about the technical kind of setup of the course later, but basically we had a bunch of external services that were all the interactive activities, because it's very difficult to do that within the core edX platform. To access any of those services, you had to go through the intro survey. There were only actually a few questions that you had to fill out, but you had to go through that process because that's how we capture data about you that integrates the two platforms. If you didn't do that, all of that information on edX was still available. You could watch all the videos, you could discuss in the discussion forums, you could do the quizzes, And in total, we had probably about 8,000 people who signed up for our course. About 2,200 ever went through the survey. So, but I mean, of the 8,000, probably 4,000 never even watched a single video, right? There are people who sign up and forget all about it. So for me, the number that's really relevant is the 2,200. But there might have been people who actually went through the whole course, watched all the videos, and were happy with that. And that's good. I mean, we're planning to take all those videos and put them on YouTube and make them publicly available. So that's a valid resource in itself, but it's not what I'm really focusing on in this talk. Once you went through the intro survey, based on that information, we generated these interest groups that you were put into. And then you had a choice. Basically, to get the statement of accomplishment, you had to do you didn't have to do the videos, but you hopefully should do the videos, the quizzes, there were reflections, and then there were simple assignments every week that were designed to feed into the design process, but that were maybe brainstorm activities, do a little bit of research, do some feedback. Then we had kind of and we were very inspired by, for example, the DAL MOOC design, the red pill and the green pill. We talked about that internally, we didn't actually call it that. But this idea that, if you really want to get engaged, this is what everyone has to do in the 4-credit university course. Because you're getting a credit. You are expected to work a large number of hours per week. For MOOC, we can't expect that from everyone. We want to have that option. So if you want to get really down and dirty, you can go and find a team and actually design a technology and inquiry lesson together. Like make a lesson plan over the whole course of the MOOC. You got no credit for that. That was an interesting decision. I mean, I discussed that with Jim. Should we, maybe that should be a requirement, and if you just want to watch the videos, you don't get the statement of accomplishment. But he said, I mean, we didn't really care very much about the statement of accomplishment and the grading structure at all, because we wanted people to come to learn, not to show how much they knew. But either way, we said, if you just want to go through the course, you get the statement of accomplishment, bye-bye, hope you had a good experience. If you want to go deep into this thing, then what you're getting is value in itself. So we gave no credits for that. And I'm quite impressed at the number of people who actually chose to participate. So we had the week 0, the teacher's lounge, which I mentioned, the SIG selection, resource sharing. So one of the things we did before the courses started was starting to have people brainstorm about interesting technology resources in their subject area. So this was the adding resources form. These were the 6 teams for the 6 weeks. And basically, they were mapped to stages of developing the lesson design as well. So in the weekly design, we had the curricular content. And we typically had 3 different kinds of videos. We had videos by Jim there on the left, who gives kind of the researcher theoretical perspective. This is what we're working on right now in universities. These are the big theories. This is the history. Then we have Rosemary Evans, who gives, who's the principal at the University of Toronto Schools, or some of the teachers there, who would be talking specifically about these are some of the things I've been doing in class. These are the practical issues that I run into. These are some of the lessons learned. And then we have authentic videos of actually running these kind of exercises in classrooms. And I think for teachers, that became really valuable because they're often quite skeptical of having some academic telling them, what works in theory. We had an inquiry track where people would do brainstorm, would rate and review, tag resources, and later as the design projects got going, they would provide feedback to design projects. And we were not interested in peer review in the sense of, grade this on a rubric, this is good or bad. We were much more interested in constructive feedback. So again, this week we're doing collaboration. Here's what a certain design group has gotten to so far. How could they add more collaboration? And then we would take, of course, those answers and feed them back to that design team. We used the special interest groups, the 10 groups that we designed. We actually used a cohort feature on edX to do the discussion forums. So when you went to the discussion forum, you would, for certain of the discussions, you would only see the posts from your special interest group, so that it would be a little bit more on topic. Because one of the special features of doing a course for teachers is that you get kindergarten teachers, you get primary school math teachers, high school arts teachers, auto tech teachers, right? And while there are certain principles in common, there's also a lot of specificity. And so being able to group them and also having the number of students that we can actually break it down fairly granularly, I think made for a better experience for the students. We had weekly personal reflection questions. And we had this idea of a shared knowledge base, which comes from the theoretical design. We brought in actually a lot of resources from the previous courses that had run at the university, examples of lesson designs, examples of resource collections, and then we were trying to really make a lot of the content that was submitted by the students during the course to index that with tags and make it searchable, make it accessible for the students, and useful when they were doing the lesson designs. So here's a quick example. I'll come back to this later, where they're tagging resources. And once the course finishes, and it has finished now, just very recently, we're planning to share a lot of this material on the public wiki. So when students signed up to do the lesson designs, they clicked off and said, yes, it's okay for me to share this publicly. So a lot of their lesson designs are already public. I'll give you the URL. A lot of the technology resources that they assembled, we're planning to make public, and hopefully maybe in the future, if another MOOC or a university course will build on this. Okay, so that was the first presentation by Hedi and Najafi. And now I'm moving to the second presentation, which is focused much more on the tech implementation. So I'm going to show you more in detail some of the features that we built, and also some of the ways that we did so. I'm going to stop quickly if there's any questions in the meantime. And I'll have time for questions at the end as well. Okay. So here's the MOOC. And again, we were really interested. My background, by the way, I'm a PhD student, final year in basically digital learning. And I'm also, for the last few years, I've been the data manager for edX and Coursera at the University of Toronto. So I spent a lot of time looking at learning analytics and seeing kind of the back ends of courses. And when courses finished, how do we get the data out? How do we process it? This was my first time actually building a course in edX. But I had some experience with the platforms. And so I was initially quite concerned about, my supervisor had all these grand ideas about how students should be interacting according to his theories. And we were, both me and Hedi had worked with the platforms, and we were kind of trying to, dampen his enthusiasm and saying, you know what, it's quite difficult in these MOOC platforms to do many of the things that you want to do. And of course, we were a very small team. We didn't have a huge amount of programmers who could just create anything you wanted. But I think we're still able to do some interesting things. I'm going to talk a bit about technology choice because I think, and I haven't heard many presentations here touching much on it, but I think it's interesting. I come from the computer-supported collaborative learning background, and in that culture, you know, we say interface matters for the kinds of interactions you're having. So the way you design a discussion forum, whether you use a discussion forum or a blog or Twitter, actually has an impact on who's talking, what they're saying, and how their collaborative learning process happens. And we believe that quite strongly. And there's a lot of people I could cite here, but you could do worse than reading some of Daniel Suther's early papers. Now, I would say, as also a technologist, the kind of stack that you choose matters for the kind of interface you end up building. This isn't necessarily as causally related, but I think if you look at the process of designing this technology, and again, especially for a small team that's very time limited, if your tech stack makes certain things easy, you're much more likely to try it out. Whether that means just iterating quickly, or it means things like, you know, if you can do live real-time updates easily, if you can do video conferencing easily, you'll put it in there. If you can't, you're much less likely to try it out. So I think it's something that's worth discussing. Now, the second issue is how do you interact with edX? How do you expand, customize edX? And as far as I know, there are basically two options. LTI, Learning Tools Integration, is a generic way of plugging into LMSs. Coursera supports it, Blackboard supports it, probably most LMSs support it in some way. This edX-specific way is to develop a custom XBlock. So XBlock is kind of the smallest component in edX. Now, the problem with XBlocks is that you can't actually, as far as I understand, use custom XBlocks on edX.org, right? So you can. Okay, so maybe you can. That's great. Or maybe you will be able to. That's an interesting discussion. Right, so, well, for sure. Either way, the idea of edX is both a software platform that is open source on GitHub. It's also a website, right? So you can download it and run yourself, and then you can do what you want, and you can develop all the XBlocks you want and plug them in. I haven't tried, so I don't know how easy it is. But it's also the edX.org official website, and there, obviously, there has to be more concerned about stability and stuff like that. LTI basically sits completely outside the platform, and there's a very thin layer where they communicate. So makes it much easier to integrate, but makes the integration a lot shallower. For LTI integration, you can choose between an iframe, which means basically a website that's part of another website, or just going to a new full page. The only information you'd get by default is a unique ID that doesn't correspond to anything else, but it will be the same every time the same student comes. However, if you do a full page load, you can also ask in the settings to get the edX user ID and the email. The reason you can only do that in a full page load is because on a full page load, the student has to click a button, and edX can then say, do you agree to give your student ID and password to this external site? Whereas in an iframe, it's loaded automatically as you enter the edX site, and so it makes sense that they wouldn't allow you to do that without the permission, right? That's really the only data that you can access. So as an external LTI component, you don't know which videos that student watched, you don't know what they did on some edX quiz. You know, it's a very thin integration, right? The nice thing, as I said, is not specific to edX, so theoretically we could take the tools that we built and just dump them into Coursera. You can do, because it's completely external to edX, you can basically do anything you want within that iframe or in that new website. So that, including you can write it in any programming language, you don't have to worry about edX APIs and so on. And because in our case we were running it on our own servers, we got immediate access to analytics data from our component. So that's actually really helpful as well. And this is a blog post I wrote February 30th. So this was when I was just starting to explore what was even possible. And the thing that really helped me with edX2 is that it's open source. Now, I don't necessarily want to read a lot of that source code. I had to read a tiny bit. But the most important thing was that I could very quickly get it running on my local computer, and thus I could try out the integration. Now, one thing is actually the LTI app. Another thing is how can we talk to the edX platform? And as far as I understand, they have a very limited set of APIs. So the only thing we can really do so far is you can have this LTI component, and you can also submit grades back. So you can do something in the LTI component, and it can send the grade back to edX. That's about it. So for example, we actually used data from the edX component to put people into groups, and we wanted that translated into cohorts on the edX side. And we couldn't do that very easily. We had to manually upload CSV files a few times a day. There was no way for us to access the edX forums. We had 10 groups. We wanted to post different things to different groups automatically. We couldn't do that. And there's also no live streaming analytics from the edX part. You get a dump every week or more often. So I used Elixir to build all the local servers. And I'm mentioning this because A, it's a fairly unknown language. It's actually, however, built on Erlang, which has been around for 30 years, and which I think runs 95% of the telephone exchanges in the world. It's basically built to be incredibly scalable and fault-resistant. And then Elixir comes on as a kind of a very user-friendly interface. And why I'm mentioning this is because I think this is a great match for writing MOOC software. Because you want something that can serve 50,000 people. You want something that isn't going to crash over if one of them does something crazy. And the nice thing is it also has very strong support for WebSockets, so live interaction, which we used, background workers, mail servers, integrating with all kinds of services. So it's a neat thing. And it's funny because their conference is actually running right this weekend, so I've been following their tweets as we were here. All of the code that we built is on GitHub, and we actually deployed directly from GitHub, so you can follow all the commits where I'm like, oh my god, quickly fix this problem. But anyway, all the code is there, and we also try to think about ways of reusing and sharing this code, because it feels, you're spending. I basically spent 3 months in a little village in China writing this code this summer. And then you feel like, okay, the MOOC is over in 3 days. Do I even bother fixing this bug? Because it'll never be used again. So what I tried to do was to make the code as modular as possible and to share as much of it as possible. So we already have a few different libraries, including an LTI library that didn't exist before, a few different blog posts. We're trying to kind of share the stuff that we build and make it useful for others. Apparently, I don't have much time, so I'll quickly skip through some of the stuff we did. This is the survey we used for the course at OISE, and we just used a Google form. R-Shiny is a way of doing a very quick interface for statistics, so we could, in class, right away see some of the different statistics on the students in the class and put them into groups, and then take that data and automatically generate wiki spaces and permissions for them. Now, I've worked a lot with surveys as analytics for Coursera and edX and also for other stuff. And there's so much boilerplate that you have to write to say this is not a value, this should be an ordered, categorical variable or whatever. But you already have that data when you define the survey. So we came up with a very simple description language for surveys, text-based. So now you can do a very quick diff. If you're collaborating with people, it's a very simple format, so everyone in my group was able to collaborate on the surveys. We can automatically generate the HTML with all kinds of validation. And now we can automatically generate all the graphs, right? So we could quickly see what people are doing. And once we had this, we started using it for a lot of different forms, like reflections. We could have little questions in the reflections and quickly check how people were doing. That's a component that I would love to make standalone. We had these forms where we added resources, reviewed resources, all this stuff I showed you already. So the thing that we worked a lot on is really this capstone project for the people who did the design projects, because here we wanted this idea of a persistent team, and there's not a lot of MOOCs that have really tried to do that because it's very difficult. You have the dropout, you have the coordination, the time zones, all that stuff. So one of the things we did was we built this collaborative workbench. So this was a full screen interface where you always had a chat on the left side with the people in your group, and you had these different tabs that would differ for each week. So you have the welcoming. Each week there would be kind of the prompts. This is what we want you to do this week. You would have the description that you could edit. You would have an Etherpad, a new one each week, but you can always go back to the previous ones. And then we added the wiki, which is where you would publish your final project. And the wiki was the only thing that was public. So your discussions on Etherpad and stuff like that was private to the group, but the wiki would be shared back to people who were reviewing. And this is where we thought a lot, because we found, on Wikipedia, it's easy for a lot of people to collaborate because I add the capital of Norway and you add the population of Norway, and there's no real conflict. We don't really need to talk about it. Whereas, so the first week where people were brainstorming ideas for designs, they were doing great. Second week, they had to choose one. And it was really difficult for them because they wouldn't necessarily log on at the same time, and nobody felt like they didn't want to. It was a nice idea. They didn't want to railroad everyone else and say, we're going to just choose this one. So one thing we did was we added notifications, so you'd get an email every time someone entered the group. And these were only 4 or 5 people, so it wouldn't be that many emails. But we found from the server logs, a huge amount of people actually clicked on that link that would take you straight into the collaborative workspace without needing to log in or go through edX. And so people would see that and say, oh, okay, I'll go in too, and now we can actually have a conversation. We also added the ability to do anonymous email groups. So you could send an email from the website, and that would go from a specific email address. When you responded to that email address, it would go to all the other people, but your email address would never be shared because we need to concern privacy. That, unfortunately, wasn't used very much. Then we had this thing which took way too much code because it's actually pulling in diffs from every single Etherpad for each week, every single wiki edit, how many people edited the wiki each week. But this was a really cool way for us to be able to track the progress of the different groups. And then you click on any of these and you can go straight to their wiki and Etherpad and see how their progress is, come in and maybe assist the groups. We had TAs that were working with the groups. This was the last week. We actually built a little interface for a live session. So we had this kind of Google moderator thing where you could vote up and down ideas and comment on them. Then we had a live chat, and then we just embedded a Google Hangout on air. So this worked really well, and students loved it. They were like, why didn't we do this every week? And we're like, well, we just programmed it. But I think in the future, having more live events is something that the students really liked. The gallery walk, where some of the best projects are publicly available, is on that link. You can go and look at it. And so, everyone this morning, we're talking about MOOCs, more social. Our platform is the most social, right? And I think and interactive and collaborative and all that stuff. And I think there's clearly a huge demand for that. Now, when it comes to how we do this, how do we design these interfaces, there are some really great examples to take from the human-computer interaction people, from the computer support collaborative learning people. Do you have a chat that's actually indexed to a graphical object where you can go back and front in time? That might be really good if you're working in a math project. Do you have some kind of a knowledge-building interface where you can drag nodes around and stuff? Like, there are so many different examples of this that we should really look at. So to conclude, we need more deep research about how these students learn, about the challenges they have in collaborating. And there's, group awareness, the team effectiveness. There's a lot of research that we need to. And we need to document ourselves, because I feel like a lot of the papers tend to be a lot of statistics and numbers and 800 MOOCs. But we need to look at deep dives into specific examples as well and document it, share it. And then looking at the technology piece, I'm curious about how we can make it easier to share, because we write so much custom software, whether it's little scripts or integrations and stuff like that. Is it as libraries in a specific, Elixir now has an LTI library, it didn't have before. So that's one very simple thing to do. Is it as XBlocks for a specific platform? Is it as social as a service? So for example, TalkBack, I think it's called, is something that was developed that you can it's just hosted somewhere else and you can plug it into your MOOC. Is it as LTI components? And for me, the ideal thing would be if I could go to edX and set up a new MOOC and go to the marketplace. I need a forum. Let me see all the forums that people have developed or integrated, and I want this forum added to my course. And I know the platforms have all been talking about this. There might be stuff already happening, but I'd love to see that. So here's your goat picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Stian. Any questions for Stian? Right.
This is more of a comment than a question, but the goal for XBlocks is exactly that App Store model. We're a few years away from getting there. It'll take a long time, but that's what we're trying to do.
again, this is just a bit of a comment, but in one of the MOOCs that I work on, we model a lot of student discussions, and we've encouraged around the world student meetups, and we've had about 30 or 40. Some of the students have, internalized these discussions really well, and they've then had their own student-run discussions and sent it back to us, and we've curated them and posted up maybe about a dozen so far. I think they really enjoy meeting up for the social aspect, but once they get past that, what keeps them together and unified as a community of learners is the fact that they engage with the model and then replicate it and add their own thing. And for me, it's fun because it makes the MOOC more, two ways. And I think they're willing to, the more work they do, they seem to be more invested in the course.
And I think we have already discussion forums and stuff like that in MOOCs, but and people introduce themselves, and sometimes you get really deep discussions, oftentimes not. But I think the really rich model is having collaboration around artifacts. Where you're not just having the forum completely separate, but you're both sitting there, whether it's a Google Doc or it's a design in a wiki or whatever, or whether it's a Tinder-like, swipe me a student, I want to chat with them right now, or it's someone that you collaborate with over 6 weeks. I think that kind of working together on something and not just, and the same thing with I think Synchronous. I think Synchronous has a huge space, but we have to move away from the let's just do a big Google Hangout. I mean, in the classroom, synchronously, we work together, we look at things, we point to things, we pan things around, we split into groups and stuff like that. And why is it that online we just go in a big Google Hangout and say discuss, right? I think we can, and there are examples of all of these things out there. We just need to make it easier to do in MOOCs, I think.
Great. It's lunchtime, so thank you for your time. Lunch is in the same area to pick up, 152 Horace Mann.